Hello and welcome to what is a very special video for me to do. This is the second of two historians and I'm going to launch straight into it. There are going to be some images which Simon has carefully sent through to me at the end. They'll be displayed between the end of the interview and the final bit where I'll talk about, well, basically do the shameless book plug and those things and add in stuff which I feel like adding, I think needs to be added in the end if there is anything. And yeah, thank you. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you find it interesting. Sorry it's taken a little bit of a while to come up and it's going up a bit late, but the thing is, me and Simon actually did how we managed to record it was today. And I'd scheduled today for two historians, and I thought I'm going to make sure there's a two historians that day, and I'm going to make sure it's a good one. So I preferred it go up a little bit late than today not be a two historians. I also apologise because the HMAS Castlemaine video didn't come out yesterday. It will now come out next week. The reason it didn't come out yesterday was because it honestly didn't upload in time, and I wasn't going to upload something. I'm going to try and put up something which actually the first version corrupted, and the second version just didn't get up in time. So I'm now taking it down and re-editing it to make it better, hopefully. Anyway, into the discussion of two historians. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second of two historians. And if I'm going to do a chat with my friends, basically, which is the theme of two historians, if I didn't get Simon on, he would probably hunt me down and hurt me with his swords. He has quite a collection of them, like Drac. So basically, there's a reason they're the first two on. Simon is not only an expert when it comes to Roman naval history and Roman archaeology, he is as much of a modern warfare geek as I am, as much as a World War I or World War II geek as any of us are. He has worked under Professor Andrew Lambert like I have. And honestly, when eventually Shipshape Group gets around to doing a Mediterranean tour, if we don't find a way to probably abduct him for a month and take him with us for the month, he will probably turn up and demand why we didn't abduct him for the month. So, Simon, please introduce yourself to everyone and what we're talking about today.
Thank you very much, Alex. My name is Dr. Simon Elliot. I'm an archaeologist, historian, and broadcaster. I've written 21 books about classical and Roman themes, a couple of bestsellers, and a couple of award winners. I've got two out next year about individually. The books are separate books, but they're about the two individuals who came the closest to conquering the far north of Britain. One's on Agricola and one's on Septimius Severus. Frequently appear on television and podcasts and radio, etc., as a Roman expert. But I love talking about all things Roman and all things naval. So this is like my natural home.
I think your office and my office are our natural homes.
Yeah.
Looking around.
Surrounded by our books and our toys.
Oh. Well, yeah, they have a nice way. This is the joy of moving houses. You know yourself. Everything just comes out and it takes forever to work out where it's going to go.
I just chuck it all out. I just get it out there just so all my toys are around. So behind your head, behind my Mac, I've got a full-size Millennium Falcon. Lego Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
As you would expect.
In many viewers' eyes, you have just gone up several thousand points of coolness.
That's a
several thousand points.
6-month build, by the way, but it was worth it. It looks beautiful. And I've got the Venator attack cruiser to tackle next, so notice it's all naval. They're all themed on navies, by the way. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Venator attack cruiser. We like cruisers, don't we?
Yes, they do work rather well. Actually, one interesting thing is when you start looking at cruiser doctrine and the Roman Navy in peacetime, there's quite a lot of that for it. But really, before we get to that, we should probably look at the beginning of the Roman Navy, because the Romans, they're a land power, but they very realized quite quickly, we need a navy, don't they?
Well, let's start at the beginning. So let's get a chronology in place to understand what we're going to talk about, mate. So when we talk about the world of the Romans, we're talking about the Roman Republic. We're talking about the early Principate phase of the empire. We're talking about the later Dominate phase of the empire. And then with the fall of the empire in the west, we're talking about what later gets called the Byzantine Empire in the east. So to give those dates, the Roman Republic dates from 509 BC, when a proud king called Tarquin the Proud was overthrown by the leading nobles in Rome, instituting the Roman Republic. That lasts from 509 through a lot of the major naval actions and campaigns of the Roman world actually through to 27 BC. Then from 27 BC, where Augustus Octavian, the last man standing at the end of the very sanguinous late first century Republican civil wars, gets acknowledged by the emperor, by the Senate as the emperor. So that's 27 BC. And so begins the Principate phase of empire, because the emperor is called the Principus, the leading citizen, which is a conceit because it's designed to disguise the fact that actually he's a dictator. But nevertheless, this is the beginning of the Roman Empire. That lasts through until AD 284, when, because of the mid-3rd century crisis of the 3rd century, the empire almost implodes. And so Diocletian becomes the emperor in 284, completely transforms the nature of the empire and drags it kicking and screaming into a new phase, the Dominate, based on the fact that he's the Dominus. So he's like an Eastern potentate. Then that lasts through till 476 AD, and then the empire in the West collapses and you move on with the Byzantine Empire. So the focus today, I'm going to look with you at the Republic, the Principate, and Dominate phases of empire, because in the Byzantine period, you get some very interesting things happening, which are new and which maybe will make a good future podcast as well.
And also, if we discuss Greek fire without having our colleague Drac on here, we will probably get burnt with Greek fire, as he's currently leading programs to try and redevelop it.
I've got my colonists ready just in case Drac tries to interlope. So if you look at those, if you look at those four broad phases, we're focusing on the first three.
Yeah.
So the first one, the Republic, this is when you actually get the major naval actions which we associate with the world of Rome. It's in the Republic. Then, when Augustus becomes the first emperor, there's no symmetrical threat at sea. So the nature of the Roman maritime forces changes dramatically. And then after the bankruptcy almost of the crisis of the 3rd century into the Dominate phase, the last third certainly of the empire in the West, there's another change takes place, which reflects the fact that the Romans haven't got much money. So broadly, and then I'll lead you in. So broadly, you have the period of the major polyremes in the Mediterranean, sort of like triremes, so biremes, triremes, quadriremes, quinquemerenes, all the way up to 40s and 50s and ridiculous numbers of oars. We can talk about what the oaring means later.
When I was discussing that doing a video on that, the people were really surprised when I said, well, actually, the most common one was the quinquemereme. It wasn't trireme. We think of the trireme as being, but once we get in the Roman era, it's the quinquemereme. It's this.
It is. But Alex, only in this period, only in the Republican period.
Yes.
And then once the symmetrical, and you can look at what the symmetrical threats there are, we can go back to them, but they are the Carthaginian Empire in the Western Mediterranean through the First, Second, and Third Punic Wars, principally the First and Second. Then later in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Hellenistic kingdoms, so Macedonia, Epirus, the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemies. And then finally, the very, very sanguinous sort of cycle of civil wars all the way through the 1st century, which ultimately ends with Augustus winning. So that's the period when in the Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, remember the Roman Empire, the Roman world is a Mediterranean world. That's when you get the big galleys, because there's an arms race going on all the time for bigger and better ships. That finishes when Augustus Octavian is the last man standing. So then you flip into the Principate phase of empire, and what he does is he realizes that basically if he's inherited everything. He's inherited 60 legions, right? Which he has to cut down to 30 quite quickly because he can't afford it. And he's inherited all these various fleets in the Med he can't afford, and also, crucially, doesn't need. Because all anybody living around the Mediterranean wants now is a break. They want a bit of peace. The Pax Romana. So he instead replaces the huge fleet of huge galleys in the Med with a series of up to 10 eventually regional fleets, which are based in the key areas where he needs naval power around the empire. So we have the Mediterranean world, and then bolted on, which is includes 3 continents, as we know. It's Europe, it's Asia, and it's North Africa. Remember, North Africa is very important as well. It's a very, very important part of the Roman world. And then he's got these bolt-ons in Gaul, and then sort of on the Rhine frontier and in Germany, and latterly on the Danubian frontier as well. So his 10 regional fleets, there are ultimately 10, include the likes of the Classis Britannica, the Classis Germanica, the Classis Alexandrina, the classis Moesicla, the classis Pannonia, the classis Ravenate, the classis Moesia. Those are all in the names, basically. So one's in Britain, one's in Germany on the Rhine, a couple are on the Danube, one's in Alexandria, one's either side of the peninsula of Italy, and so on. They're all no-brainers, really. There's one in North Africa. They're all no-brainers. But the interesting thing there, Alex, is that the ships have changed. And instead of having these big polyremes, you don't need them because you don't have a symmetrical threat. And most of the time in this phase, the fleets are being used. It's always in support of land forces. So therefore, you need to have very good designs of vessels to operate in the littoral coastal zone and down the riparian river systems. Remember, all Roman forts are on rivers. All later Roman towns were on rivers. It's all about water and accessing.
It's logistics.
Yeah, it is purely.
Although I have to say, whenever with the fleet's been called Classis Britannicus, etc., I always remembered of a joke. Who was it? It was Dr. Michael Partridge at St Mary's used to say, which was that we get the study of classics because it used to be you studied Roman fleets, the classis.
Oh, good man. I like that.
And that was where he said you got
what a good joke.
And he said the reason for that is because, of course, the true academic is always studying naval history because that's where all the important things come from for the world. I just used to go.
Mate. I like him already, mate.
Unfortunately, he's dead, but he was absolutely wonderful. He was my tutor when I was doing my bachelor's. But yeah, one of the things you see the transition of basically a war fleet to, well, it's a logistics, occasionally amphibious maneuver, maritime security policing tasks. So realistically, it's a littoral force. That's what they're moving. They're moving into a sort of a littoral force from being a war fleet because they don't have anyone to go and fight. And the latter part was they were literally fighting each other. They'd run out of enemies to fight on piers and they were fighting each other because they've been almost too successful.
But they still have a standing series of fleets, which is important because actually the story after the crisis of the 3rd century, moving into the dominated phase of empire is on a decline. Okay. Mm-hmm. And one of the manifestations of decline is the lack of standing fleets. So because the Roman Empire effectively went... Exactly right. Yeah, well, you and I both know choosing not to spend money on naval defense at sea is actually a false way of saving money. Because actually, it ultimately always costs you far more in the long run because you can't actually control access to your own territory and your own goods and your own resources.
Because everything always ultimately has to move by sea. Ultimately, at the end, in a nice way, it's either, even today, we forget just about 95% of our goods by volume and mass move by sea. 99% of our telecommunications. And if you look at the Roman era, when you talk about Mare Nostrum and you talk about it being a Mediterranean world, and it was a Mediterranean empire because the Mediterranean was their internal line of communications. It was what everything depended on. So if you don't have a fleet, you can't exploit your own internal communications. You can't maneuver your forces. You can't defend yourself because you can't redeploy forces as easily from one point to another point. And the whole point about the Roman Empire was you could redeploy forces where you needed them. That's how they maintained it.
Absolutely right. So let's briefly stay with the Principate phase of empire before we go on to the fleets disappearing and what happened afterwards. Okay. So in that period, just to illustrate the fact that nearly all Roman forts are on a river to give access to the ability to transport goods by river and ultimately by sea. We'll use Britain as our example. We'll go, these are all towns and cities in modern Britain, which were originally Roman forts, which then had the vicus settlements, which then became later towns, and they exist today. Roman forts on rivers, southwest to northeast. Exeter, Roman fort on a river. Gloucester, Roman fort on a river. Cardiff, Roman fort on a river. Chester, Roman fort on a river. Leicester, Roman fort on a river. Manchester, Roman fort on a river. York, Roman fort on a river. Newcastle, Roman fort on a river. Carlisle, Roman fort on a river. York, Roman fort on a river. The list is endless. And they're all joined up by the Roman road network, which is our road network, which the Romans built. And also that is fully integrated with maritime transport. So it's actually a fully integrated transport system, including, as most people forget, the sea and rivers. And most goods travel by sea and river. Another example, in the same phase of empire, if the Emperor Alexander, I like that, it's got a ring to it actually, but I should give you this. There you go. You're now put it on there for you, see if you can see it. You're now the Emperor Alexander. If you wanted to get a message to me as your governor in Londinium from Rome, it would take 11 to 12 days, which doesn't sound long. And it's not long, actually, because the journey goes Rome to Ostia, the port of Rome, Ostia to Marseille across the Western Mediterranean, Marseille up the Rhone to Lyon, from Lyon to central Gaul along the Saône, short distance overland, picking up the Seine. Seine takes you to the northwest coast of Gaul, go to the port of Boulogne-sur-Mer, travel across to Dover or Richborough, and then probably still straight down the Thames estuary if it's very quick, otherwise along Watling Street to London. 12 days. Most of that journey is by sea and river.
Yeah. And it works. You know, the Romans are famed for roads, but really they should be as famed for maritime transport or maritime exploration. But the thing is, and I do get this, I once actually had an honest discussion with some people. I was at a conference and I was talking about it. It was an interdisciplinary conference, and I started talking about Roman Navy. You know, the Romans didn't have a navy; they had legionnaires. They didn't have navies. And I was looking at them going, "Are you joking?" And unfortunately, they continued this on with a professor who I won't name, and they obviously weren't joking. They really didn't think that the Romans had a navy, and you sit there and go, "But that's in many ways our fault, because whilst you've been doing absolutely amazing work, and please do show off your books, because you've got some really great books, and I'm sure you've got one out for Christmas that people should be looking at. I know your production of books is almost as bad as Glyn Stewart, who's the science fiction writer, who basically, you seem to basically disappear for about a week and come back with he's 4 more books I've written.
See these? They're my books. So let people zoom in. Vandal Heaven's my most recent one, which is my take. Vandal Heaven is my take on the fall and decline of Roman North Africa. Because I've done a lot of traveling recently, Alex, in North Africa, which have got some amazing Roman sites. So, but actually, bizarrely, following in the footsteps of my grandfather, who served in the 8th Army in the war, I've ended up going to a lot of the places he went to when he was in North Africa, and then he was in Italy. So, following in the footsteps of my grandfather, who served in the Sherwood Foresters.
That must have been fun.
It was fun. So with so moving on from the Principate to the Dominate. So the Roman Empire almost goes bust, and it can't afford a lot of these regional fleets. So things like the Classis Britannica, as last mentioned in AD 249 in a funerary inscription, and then it disappears, completely disappears. And then you jump forward in time to see what the consequences of not maintaining your fleets were. And you go through to 286, only 2 years after Diocletian became the emperor, dragged the empire kicking and screaming out of the crisis, and the Dominate begins. Completely reforms Roman imperial administration, begins a major reform of the Roman military, but he's got no fleets. And in 286, 2 years afterwards, 286, Carausius, the British usurper, usurps, and he's able to do so because he's just built a brand new fleet to clear the North Sea of endemic German piracy. Why is there endemic German piracy in the North Sea? Because there's no Classis Britannica. So what do the Romans have to do? They have to build a brand new fleet from scratch, and that costs a lot of money. And then how do the Romans try and take out Carausius when he usurps to Britain? They have to build another fleet in the Rhine Delta, and something happens to it and it disappears. Either it was defeated in battle, on land, or on the coast, or at sea, or it's destroyed in a storm. So when Constantius Chlorus, eventually in 296, the father of Constantine the Great, decides he's going to take out Carausius usurper, he has to build a third fleet. So because there's no standing fleet, the province in Britain suffers from endemic German piracy, which leads to a usurpation and the building of 3 fleets. When if they'd kept the one fleet going, they wouldn't have had the expense of doing it.
And it would be a lot cheaper.
There's no evidence that the fleet was kept. No evidence the fleet was kept in being after the event. So each time afterwards, the Romans needed a fleet in the North Sea and English Channel. They built a new one. So they were looking at short-term cash flow problems all the time. So you got so there's your 3 basic phases we're going to be looking at. There's the big naval battle phase in the Republic. There's the smaller local fleet supporting provincial growth of the empire and maintaining its frontier in the Principate. And then there's the randomness of the Dominate Empire, when fleets get built at great expense at short notice, when in desperation the Romans find that they really do need them. The final point to make about the Dominate before we... Oh, go on.
Yeah. I remember you talking about these fleets and all, because one of the things that interested me was basically what you described as they would often have at their heart something which we would call a royal dockyard in the UK, considering our history. They would build a dockyard which would be able to do all the service and maintenance fleets, and it was these facilities which they would turn to build these fleets every single time. But you sit there and go, yeah, that's a great facility to have, but if you just kept it a little bit of money going through, you'd probably have a lot less issues and actually have a fleet when you need it. Because the trouble is, if you're depending on building a fleet when you need it, you're not going to have that fleet available for about 6 months at least. Probably longer.
A superb analogy we've spoken about a number of times is the astute class. So you have a window of capability, and then to come back to get the same capability is exceptionally difficult. Because all the trained craftsmen, in this case carpenters, shipwrights, sailmakers, and also the crews as well, because remember, this is not like chucking a centurion and a few legions on a ship. Being a sailor or even being in a marine actually is a very different job. You lose that capability and it takes a generation to get back. Okay. Yeah. And actually they lost that capability in the dominate phase of Empire again and again and again and again. And hey, guess what? I'm not saying it's the reason why the Empire in the West fell in 476, but the Empire in the West did fall in 476. And clearly one of the reasons was a lack of naval capability, because very cleverly, segueing back into my book about Vandal Heaven, the people who conquered the richest part of the Roman Empire, North Africa, where all the bread came from to feed the people of Rome, were the Vandals. And what did the Vandals do? The Vandals, very good at osmosing. They were a Germanic warrior people. They were very good at osmosing other people's military capabilities, and it's they who actually got a maritime capability going so well in the Western Mediterranean that it's they who sacked Rome in 455 through a naval expedition. And their main engagement with the Roman world was maritime raiding, almost certainly using Roman ships and almost certainly using Roman crews from the parts of the world they conquered in Spain and North Africa, because they were probably getting paid better.
Yeah, and that's the way you get the people, you pay them. But also, the other fun thing you and I often have is with people who tell, I don't know if you get this as much as I do, but people turn around and say, yes, all the oarsmen were slaves.
Never. Never. One of the interesting things about Gladiator 2, by the way, I was quite pleased with Gladiator 2, because that's not a, I mean, look, it's a movie, and I thought it was a great movie. It's a movie. I don't care if things are wrong. That wasn't a bad representation of, I'm not sure you'd have galleys ramming against the walls of what is actually clearly meant to be Carthage, by the way. But that's not a bad representation of classical sort of military naval capability. And also they didn't try and prove that the people rowing were slaves, which I thought was quite pretty good, actually, because if you go back to Ben-Hur or Antony and Cleopatra or that kind of thing, I mean, basically you've just come out of there. I mean, in fact, they're the two reasons why most people think that people who would get on galleys rowing were slaves, because of those two movies.
When you think about it, if they're your engine, you A, have to feed them properly, and B, they're going to be exercising a lot. So in the nicest way, you've got two scenarios. If they are slaves, you fed and trained them, so now they're very strong. You have to be very scared of them. And if the enemy comes on and breaks their chains, they're now free and going to be attacking you. But alternatively, if they're on your side and they're paid people who are working for you, then if the enemy bores your vessel, they're on your side and they're big and strong and well fed and are going to literally hurt someone, because most of the oarsmen, they're like longbowmen. They are massively overdeveloped. When we found their skeletal remains of what we think are oarsmen, they are really, really bulked up guys, because they have been doing a lot of work. You know, people don't look at it, but you're looking at someone who does the equivalent of the Olympics rowing, but for days non-stop.
They are. A quick point to make is, in the pre-modern world, as you know, it's probably highly unusual actually to get especially very expensive pieces of military kit like warships operating outside of sight of land unless they can help it. So more often than not, the crew on the ship, including the people rowing, are spending the night, as it were, on land. Okay, more often than not. To the rowers, my point has always been this: you're talking about the most complicated piece of military equipment of the era. On land, the most complicated piece of military equipment is a ballista or a piece of artillery. Well, that's just one thing that's a component of a classical warship. So actually, you're talking about the equivalent of a modern ICBM or a reconnaissance satellite or an aircraft carrier. Astronomically expensive pieces of kit to build and maintain. It's maintaining, just as today, the cost of maintaining is one of the major issues in keeping a fleet in being. So why the hell are you going to put that in the hands, as you say, of somebody who's the least motivated person in society? You're not. So the rowers they're called remiges or remiges. They were all professionals, unless it was a real emergency. But they were almost, 99.9% of the time, they were professionals.
And even when they were slaves, they tended to be freed slaves. They were freed on the condition of service, sort of thing. That was the thing of you're going to be freed in condition you have to do some rowing these ships. So you're earning your freedom by rowing. You're not slaves. It was that was done in an emergency scenario, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember when that was. It was one of the battles against the Carthaginians when the Romans needed to raise an extra fleet. They basically did that for some ships because they were short. And I don't think it wasn't Scipio. It was the guy who was doing earlier in the first Punic War was basically going, no, I'm not leaving these 20 ships behind. I'm going to find another way of getting the oarsmen for him. And basically went, you will earn your freedom. I'll give you your freedom, but you have to go and serve on these ships for this campaign season.
It's not uncommon, by the way. It's not uncommon, by the way. Look, in the year of the Four Emperors, AD 69, various of the candidates had to arm slaves or arm gladiators or train to operate in a main battle formation, Germans or Gauls, etc., simply because they were short of manpower. But for preference, you're going to have a professional rower. The name the Romans use for troops on land and sea is the same. The catch-all name is a milite. And the milite at sea includes the Marines, it includes the Velari controlling the sails, it includes the deckhands, and it includes the rowers. They're all the same. And they're all paid about the same as well, which is the same as a Roman auxiliary. So they're not paid as well as a legionary, but they're still paid pretty well. And so for those people who don't think maritime power, etc., is a normal component of the Roman military, it's an intrinsic part of the Roman military. Let's go back to one of your early points. It's interesting you were talking about your friend saying the Romans only had legionaries. I agree with this, that the Romans thought of milites at sea.
Please note,
as being
not a friend, someone I met at a conference. I'm glad
someone you met at a conference.
So
I can lend you my Gladius if you want.
It was an interdisciplinary conference, and there were people from all sorts of things, and this person may or may not have been from the engineering department. And
well. the milites at sea were thought of by the Roman military strategists as an extension of the land forces. So it was not common in the principate phase of empire or dominate phase of empire to have fleets operating in the open ocean blue water environment. It did happen, but not often. In my view, just the threat of the Classis Britannica being able to forward deploy into the North Sea if needed would have been enough to deter. It's a deterrent, isn't it? Deter endemic German raiding of a level where you actually are in real trouble.
Because you get to the point, if you're a pirate, and this is something which, of course, the Royal Navy then enforces throughout for most of the period, it's the dominant naval power, is basically piracy is always going to happen in certain parts of the world where you've got less presence. It's a certain level. But the thing is, the moment they start sailing around in more than one ship, and there's more than one ship or so a month getting hit, that's when warships turn up. Because the moment they're starting to form even small groups, that's when you go, excuse me. Because the last thing you want is endemic level would usually talk about when they're sailing around with groups of 5 or 6 ships and they've got these small little squadrons going on and they've taken control of the sea and they're basically taxing at this point, or farming the merchant ships. That's when you have problems. That's when you have, today it would be insurance rates and those things go up, but in that period when you don't have insurance, it's basically you're not going to put your money into that, doing that trade voyage, into moving those goods, which is the important thing of the empire. The empire is about moving goods and moving trade around to give yourself the economic strength to do the things you need to do.
And the things you're doing there, so, you're joining a few. You're joining a few dots together for me, which is brilliant. So, there are some of the best examples we have of maritime power being used in the later Republic are against pirates. So Pompey the Great, Pompey Magnus, made his name defeating the Cilician pirates. Cilician pirates around the coast of Asia Minor, basically the former naval personnel, probably with their original ships of the Hellenistic kingdoms the Romans had taken out. So they become pirates. So therefore the Romans have to take it seriously, and then Pompey the Great comes along and destroys them and makes his name. You know the story of Caesar, obviously, and the Cilician pirates as well. So piracy is a big deal.
Basically, Caesar makes his name by claiming the pirates aren't charging enough in ransom for him, and then saying he's still going to come back.
No, he's very specific. He says, "I'm going to come back and crucify you all."
Yes, and he does.
He does. Although he's very kind about it, because he feels sorry for them, because he actually got on with them quite well. So once they were on the cross, he had the throats cut, so they die quickly. It's quite nice when you think about it.
That's it.
But the name,
that's so nice.
The name for a pirate vessel of that period, the late Republic, is a Liburnian.
Yeah.
And the name given to the Roman ships, which make up the bulk of the combat force of the Principate regional fleets, is Liburnian, and they're nippy biremes.
Yeah,
right. They're a nippy bireme with a ballista on the front, fighting tower on the back. Probably got a crew of about 100. 80 of them are going to be rowing, probably 10 deckhands and 10 marines. So they're just small, nippy ships, basically, which are great operating in the littoral zone around the coast and down river systems. And then, of course, a plethora of cutters and skiffs as well. So you've got a fleet there in each region, with maritime technology reflecting the region from where they come from, but a fleet in a region doing a bespoke specific job. Now, here's the key thing. The fleets operating in the late Republic and earlier against the Carthaginians and the Hellenistic kingdoms, they were fleet-on-fleet actions. Here, they're not. More often than not, because there's no symmetrical threat, the fleet is being used in conjunction with a land campaign. So I've just finished my book on Agricola. Most of Agricola's campaigns in Britain in the far north, he was closing off the maritime flank, the first thing he did. And there are references to the native local economies in the far north being destroyed because of the operations of, quote-unquote, the fleet. The action which is the one thing he did where people today, including me, claim that he conquered for a very brief period of time the whole of the main island of Britain, was he ordered the fleet to circumnavigate the main island. So clearly it was a big deal, and it was all part of an integrated combined operations with the land forces. So that's a big difference, I think. Another big difference between the Republic. You can almost forget about the Dominate, because the Dominate later phase, you're just getting fleets being built and then going and then built and going. There's no pattern to it because there's very little money. But when you get the wealth of the late Republic and then the wealth of the Principate phase of Empire, the fleets are doing critical jobs. And the difference here is Republic, big ships, fleet actions, and helping on the land, but largely fleet actions. The Principate phase of Empire, small ships, supporting land forces.
It does help, that sort of thing, and it's one of those things when you're getting into these operations that Romans are very good at integrated warfare. They're very good at going, right then, what do we have available? Let's make the most out of not our individual parts, but the sum of our parts if we put them together, and how we put them together. Because that's the thing they have to, at a certain point. During the dominant phase, they do. They're on a downward spiral. It's just bad, okay? It's just bad at that point. But in the earlier phase, especially the late Republic, but the early Empire, the early sort of Principate area, that they are working out how to work together. And a lot of Roman administration is focused on two things, I would think. One, making sure they have the logistics in place, the supplies in place, and the pay in place to pay their forces. And two, making sure they communicate and work together and can actually bring about the things they want to bring about. Because the thing I point out to people is, if you look at the Spanish Armada, that is the King of Spain trying to do what the Romans did centuries before him and failing. And that's the
Big
point.
time.
Failing.
Big time.
And you sit there and go, this is supposed to be a newer, more advanced era. He's failing. He cannot coordinate the army. He cannot coordinate the navy. He cannot get them to work together because of the way the world's changed, but also because fundamentally the administration and the organization just isn't there.
You know what's interesting there, actually, Alex? It's a very really good analogy, right? One of the reasons it's often stipulated by why campaigns like the Spanish Armada failed with its combined maritime and land-based component is because the people at sea, the leadership, weren't necessarily very experienced in maritime command and control. So you extrapolate that back to the Roman period, and actually there's no difference there, really. You didn't have Roman admirals as such. It was a job on a career ladder. If you were a Roman aristocrat of a senatorial level, or if you were lucky in equestrian level, the level below, so it's probably overall top 3 or 4% of society. If you were a male noble in that bracket, then you actually have a set career path in your life. And it's called the cursus honorum. The cursus honorum is basically your job. You get a job at that stage in the cursus honorum, junior magistrate, junior officer, a job in the cursus honorum, middle magistrate, middle ranking officer, a job, senior magistrate, consul in Rome, senior military officer, legate in charge of a legion. And then if you get through all of that and you're still alive and the emperor likes you, then you could become the governor of a province and make a lot of money. And within that broad picture, there's probably about 20 or 30 levels. I've just given you a small snapshot.
Yeah.
Now, at each stage of the military command and control, you're not necessarily going to be in a legion or an auxiliary unit. It's absolutely normal second nature for the Romans for it to be a naval posting. So you could be, there's an emperor called Pertinax, who was the first emperor of the year of the 5 emperors in 193. It's a veteran soldier latterly in the Marcomannic Wars, which are the conflict in the movie Gladiator. And I've written a book about him called Pertinax, son of an emperor who became son of a slave who became Roman emperor because his father was a manumitted slave.
Yeah.
Now, one of his first military postings was as a junior officer in York with the Legion's 6 Victrix. His next posting was as a junior officer in charge of an auxiliary unit at Houston's on Hadrian's Wall. His next posting was on the upper Danube, commanding a flotilla of war galleys, Liburniae, biremes, on the upper Danube, so Pannonia, where he would have been based out of Carnuntum, which is a legionary fortress near to Vienna. And then later, 2 jobs down the line, having taken a couple of civilian jobs, he gets the big boy's job as the Prefectus Classis, fleet admiral in charge of the whole Classis Germanica. And then he ends up controlling 2 and 3 and 4 legions in the Marcomannic Wars. It's absolutely normal. So I think part of normal military training for a Roman aristocrat was how to manage military forces, not only on land, but also on sea. A lot of people don't actually pick that out.
I would say also one of the things I always like about the Romans is they do have a sort of NCO corps. They do have some specialists in their officers. They usually are from the slightly below, but also still from sometimes the equestrian level. And they're things like the Oppios, etc., in the legions. And they have, I think they do have, I always forget the equivalent rank, but they do have sort of ship's master sort of rank, sailing master rank in the Navy, don't they? For the ships?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
And
yeah.
that
usually they have the same titles as the land troops.
Yeah, and basically the rule was, and it's kind of like you've got at certain points in period when people history, is you're in charge. Your job is to be in charge of the force, yes, but that's your expert. So that's kind of like your sergeant major in your battalion.
Yeah.
If you run some of your ideas past that person who's been doing it for probably about 20 years and knows it, you'll be fine, because you're there to deal with the order, giving the orders, organizing the wider force, integrating into the larger force, carrying out the operations and those things. That's the person there who's there to translate your orders into what is practical instructions. And they might translate it for you and then you give them, or you might say to them, carry on. Which is the traditional thing in the British Army, is just go, carry on, Sergeant.
But by the way, that's the reason why that's the reason why Maximian in 286 made the mistake from his perspective of appointing Carausius to build a fleet to take out the Germanic raiders predating the North Sea, because Carausius was a highly experienced land-based military commander who'd grown up in the Rhine Delta and was famous for his endeavors leading naval units. So he's basically like the Cunningham of his day. If you put Cunningham in charge of the fleet and then he'd actually usurped, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, but Cunningham would have done a good job. He'd have hated the paperwork, but he'd have done a good job.
Carausius did do a good job. Carausius won. He defeated all the Germanic predating raiders, and then you end up with Maximian being jealous, basically, and trying to kill him because he's jealous. So that's why Carausius usurped. It wasn't because he was a failure; it's because he was a success. And then he basically kept his own North Sea empire going, keeping out the whole imperial centre for another 10 years. By the way, it's also he who, having gradually seen his fleet be chipped away at, built the later phases of the Saxon shore fort chain. So Richborough, in my view, Dover, Richborough, Pevensey, Porchester, he built those forts, which, by the way, is another error. So he got that wrong, because actually he's spending huge amounts of money to build and then maintain a fortification, which can only stop people when they're going back. It's a complete waste of money. Always have your fleet in being, Alex. Always have your fleet in being.
Well, what's the trouble? It was that they could only attack them when they were actually trying to draw. It just, I don't know.
Fleet in being. You need a fleet in being.
Now, I think before we go much further, we have to do have to tackle the thing which I know I get comments about on my channel, and I've the discussion of oarsmen. Now, of course, I've already mentioned Quiquereme, which of course means 5. Now, some people think that means 5 sets of oars.
Yeah.
And I would say no, it means 3 sets of oars with just 2 rowers on each of the top 2 sets of oars, and one.
Or maybe even only 2. Maybe even only 2.
Yeah. You know, it just there could be a 3 on one set and 2 on the other. It's just the amount of people, because you and I both know it goes up to 20, 40 somethings, and there's no way you're having 40 sets of oars on a ship.
So I can you share screen? Because I can show your
share screen. There should be a green button which allows you to share. There should be a green button which allows you to share.
I'm trying to get to a certain slide, and if I get to a certain slide, I'll show you, because the reality is there. We don't know, right? We literally don't know, because we've got no evidence. But what I do have is a contemporary image, right? So this is relevant. Stick with me, viewers and listeners. Right, so I'm going to share screen.
This is the typical historian hunting for files on their computer, by the way.
Sending a request. I sent you a request. This is worth it, though. Right, so this is worth it. Right, so can you see that?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go slideshow, play from start. So, no, I'm not. I'll just quickly whiz through it. Bear with me. Stop share. I'm going to try again.
First Hammer of the Scots. Oh, that's a good one.
What? My book on Severus. So I'm going to show what a Liburnian looks like, and then I'm going to show contemporary graffiti of one, okay? So, go share screen again. Share. There. So you can see that picture there, the Liburnian, yeah?
Yeah.
So that is a galley. It's called the Dover Patrol. It's actually a really nice piece of artwork. That's what you're talking about with the Liburnian galley. And that's got 2 banks of oars, but it's a bireme, so it would. There you can see it's got its ramp on the front, etc. But there's a blister probably here, probably a fighting tower when they want to wreck one there. 3 ships going out to patrol the English, what we call now the English Channel. So that's what it looked like. However, this is much more interesting. Can you see this?
Just about, yeah.
Can you see the fact it's graffiti? Right. So what you're looking at is can maximize the start. Do slideshow. That's as good as I'm going to get it. That is a piece of lead waste from Brancaster, which is an early Saxon shore fort near on the north coast of Norfolk. It's the reverse of a lead ingot, which wasn't formed properly, so it's thrown away and it's been used as some graffiti. So here, that's been drawn onto it by somebody around AD 220 who saw a Roman galley of the Classis Britannica before it disappeared. You can see the shields across the top of the deck. You can see the ram-shaped hull. You can see the planking very clearly. You can see the foresail, and there's the mainsail there. That, my friend, is graffiti of a Roman war galley seen by somebody in real life. How cool is that? And what I'll do actually, so you can share it with your viewers, I'll just email it to you now. I know we're on camera, but I'll do it in real time.
Yeah.
So there you go. You've got it now. So you can actually insert that wherever you want to in the deck. That's a really powerful image for me because that's someone drew that from experience. Really, really, really powerful for me.
I'll stick it up at the end of the video. So if you want to see it, it'll be literally at the end of the video for you to be able to look through and zoom it. So because then you can just open it at the screen and can just pause it and they can look at it for as long as they like.
Shared stopped. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So what about, do you have got any specific questions you want to throw at me?
I've got tons. So the first one is going to be, why do you think we have forgotten so much about the Roman naval efforts and the Roman and maritime capabilities? Because it seems to me, you and I know, and there's a few naval historians on it, but whenever I go talk to wider community, it's a case of, oh, I didn't realize that, or as said, it's, no, they didn't, or they really didn't. You know, there seems to be a lot of people who just don't seem to compute the fact the Roman Empire spreads around the Mediterranean, and so they need some naval capability. But it's all forgotten. It's like the Punic Wars. Everyone talks about Hannibal's elephants and crossing the Alps with them. What I forget is he had to bring those elephants across from North Africa first. So they had to go by ship first.
And even more important, from a Roman perspective, the Romans actually learnt all about maritime power on the open ocean from the Carthaginians in the First Punic War, and being exceptionally good at learning things. They basically flipped it on its head and then defeated the Carthaginians at their own game. So that's the reason why Hannibal had to go around the Western Mediterranean by land with his elephants to get over the Alps, because he'd lost control of the open ocean. Absolute hard fact. So therefore, again, always have your fleet in being, Alex. Always have your fleet in being. To answer your question directly, it's because of the antiquarian focus on the Roman legionary. Most people, when they talk about the Roman legions, they think about one thing, which is a Roman legionary in an imperial Gallic helmet, Lorica segmentata banded iron armor, Gladius Hispaniensis. I've got one of those there. Scutum shields, etc., etc. So that's basically it. It's just not been until basically I think I wrote the first book about it, my Seagulls book, specifically about the Classis Britannica. Just not been an interest of focus at all. But it is now.
There's so much to learn from it, because the Romans went through so many things we've gone through, so many things we're dealing with today. You know, they have this period of changing fortunes and changing world, and they have to adapt to it. And you know, it's always interesting to me, the Romans do adapt to it, and the Romans do keep adapting, and they keep adapting to when threats are coming up, until honestly the whole system just breaks down. People like to come up with all sorts of a simple reason. So it's this reason, it's that reason, whichever's the fad or the counterculture culture today. This is why the Roman Empire fell. But actually, when you look at it, the Roman Empire falls because it's a death by 1,000 cuts, and it's
one of those cuts
they're not it's the fleet. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So we're gonna rectify that.
Yeah, it's. But also, one of the things I think people forget with the Romans, and we talked about this a bit of logistics, but they had to deal with piracy almost as a constant. They had to deal with maritime security threats almost as a constant. And that Dover patrol picture is beautiful for illustrating that, because, as I tried to mention earlier, the problem was when you get pirates going out in more than one ship. Well, if they're in a pair of ships, 3 ships still gives you guaranteed victory over them. And also, if you've got patrols going around occasionally of 3 ships as a presence, that means that if I'm a pirate, I need to try and have a force of at least 3 ships, if not more, to be able to deal with those patrols. And that's a big leap to go to from a single ship.
Here we can look at. We have a hard anecdotal example, which we've already spoken about, that the first time endemic German piracy in the North Sea is mentioned is after the Classica Britannica has disappeared, and it's so bad that it's affecting the economy of the continent along the European coastline and in Britain so badly they have to build a fleet to take it out. So the first time that serious maritime predating raiding on Britain is mentioned is when the fleet's disappeared.
And I suppose the classic example, though, also is the fact that people forget the invasions of Britain themselves were amphibious operations. And Julius Caesar, for all his great skills, doesn't exactly invent things. As a rule.
Well,
he tends to use proven technologies and just throw a lot of money at it.
So there were 4 Roman invasions of Britain. Season number 1, 55 BC, his worst campaign. Yeah. Season number 2, 54 BC, Claudius AD 43, and then Constantius Chlorus against the usurper Carausius in 296. Season 1 and 2, Caesar never intended to overwinter. But even then, in his second year of campaign, he brought 25,000 men over, which is a huge amount of men, actually. Claudius, when he comes over, he brings 30,000 men and creates the province. And then when the fleet's being used to support Agricola, he's got an army of 30,000 men in the north. When the fleet's being used to support Septimius Severus, he's got 50,000 men. And of that 50,000, by the way, 7,000 are the crew and the troops and the etc. the fleet. So in actual fact, the fleets are in use all the time. But the key takeaway is it's an absolutely normal thing for the Romans to do. It's just that we only have these small snapshot examples in time, which we know about. There were 2 of the Roman maritime operations as part of the Claudian invasion. There was the initial one, obviously. Then there was Vespasian's invasion of the Isle of Wight, described as being an invasion of Britain in miniature. And then later, Agricola launches a maritime invasion of probably the southwest of Scotland from the southern banks of the Solway Firth, also described as a maritime invasion of Britain in miniature. So therefore, it's not out of the ordinary. You know, it's just an absolutely normal part. I don't think the Romans would have thought of the navy as being anything other than an absolutely normal part of their military establishment.
Which is a kind of interesting take, because that seems natural for me to think about when we talk about Romans, especially the way they learnt naval warfare from the Carthaginians, who were, well, I usually think of them as the Polynesian Empire, isn't it? That the sort of you have a sort of, they sort of go where they sort of spread around. There's different Phoenician, not Polynesian. I knew I was saying the wrong one, but I said it anyway. Phoenician Empire. They're sort of the Western Phoenician Empire, because the Phoenician Empire sort of starts off in the Eastern Mediterranean and kind of gets eventually eroded by the land powers. But the thing about the Carthaginians is they are a strong enough position and far enough away from those centers of larger numbers of people that their navy can allow them to some defense against them. And of course, the whole of North Africa campaign, if you're trying to fight along North Africa, as Rommel will tell you, let alone anyone else, there ain't many railways, there ain't many roads. If you need to support logistically move armies around, you need control of the sea. And so if you have control of the sea around you in North Africa, unless they try to bring an army over the Sahara, which is never a good fun with logistics, you're kind of in trouble. And it ain't going to go much that far. And that's also one of the reasons why the Romans do need to control the sea before they can win the Punic Wars, is they need to be able to supply their forces.
So I think of the Carthaginians as being fighty Phoenicians. Yeah. So they're the fighty Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are one of the mighty sort of maritime mercantile peoples of the ancient world, which spread their control all the way throughout the eastern and western Mediterranean. Cadiz, as an example, founded by the Carthaginians. Many of the cities and towns in Roman North Africa founded by the Carthaginians. It's like a chronological layer cake, and they're one of the early slices of the layer cake. But they're fighty Phoenicians, and then they're defeated by the Romans. And then you're absolutely right, actually, throughout every phase of activity, it's control of that coastline that's important. going back to an earlier example to prove the point, when the Vandals and the great Geiserik conquered Roman North Africa, which was probably the biggest body blow to the empire in the west, he conquered North Africa between 429 and 433, landing from Spain over the Straits of Gibraltar, and then over that 4-year period, just hacking his way along the North African coast, literally having a fleet anchored on the coast as he went along. So the fleet would jump ahead, secure harbours and secure pastures and secure defendable land, and then he'd arrive, defeat the locals and carry on. And it's almost like a modern example of combined operations where when you have the fleet operating in the literal, it makes the job of the military and land so much easier.
And what I laugh is, by the way, and this is a tip for the viewers, but I'm fairly sure Simon already knows this. I don't know if you remember Rome Total War, the later editions where they had the fall of Rome, sort of the Byzantine Empire, the second sort of the later sort of echelons of it. And one of the things you were always advised to do as the sort of the traditional Western Empire was, whatever you do, do not let this group get to North Africa.
Yeah.
And all the advice I was that, and I'm sort of going, yeah, that's both good advice historically and the game, because either way, you lose control of North Africa, your economy's gone. Boom, bye bye.
By the way, at the moment I'm actually playing. It's very interesting to say that my one of my game experts at the moment is playing Rome Medieval Total War 2, and I'm playing the Byzantine Empire around 1000. So not that dissimilar in actual fact, and it's all about controlling the coast.
Oh yeah, it is. It's all about how naval control. That's the whole thing for Byzantium and the Byzantine Empire is literally the reason why Constantinople Byzantium falls when it does. It's because they've lost control of the seas. As long as they had control of the seas and were able to dominate them, they're able to win it. They were able to dictate the pace of battle, and that's. It's the thing about it as well, is also factoring into these sort of scenarios, and this is what we find sometimes most troubling to explain to students today, because they have, especially the ones who are coming through now, they have no experience of a world like this, whereby your communication time is measured in days, not seconds, not minutes or hours, days. And talk about the letter getting from Rome to your governor in the UK, in Britain. And it took 12 days. To get a response, therefore, would take at least 24 days, which is over 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And if your question was, what's going on? I've heard some rumors, what's going on? Their response is coming back to you is going, well, actually, it looks like we're being invaded, so please send help. That's a 3-week delay before you can start issuing orders. Then you've got to send off the orders. The orders have got to get a place. Then the people are going to move. And you're talking already, before your actual force can start reacting, months. But you've got to try and do it under those circumstances. And
the best example I can give you actually of that is Septimius Severus, because when Pertinax was assassinated, the first emperor of the year of the 5 emperors, Pertinax took over from the assassinated Commodus. There were 3 players for the throne, really. There was Severus, who was the governor of Pannonia Superior in Carnuntum on the Danube near Vienna. There was Clodius Albinus, who was the British governor in Londinium. And there was Pescenius Niger, who was the Syrian governor in Antioch on the Orontes. And Antioch on the Orontes is also about 12 days, whereas Severus is only 6 days away. So it took 6 days for Severus to get the message. So he got a week's jump on the others. And it was he who obviously arrived in Rome first and then walked into the Senate with his gladius drawn, saying, I'm the emperor. And they all said, absolutely, you are, not a problem. Where would you like us to sit? And that's all about communications and distances. But even that journey, a lot of it was by water as well.
Yeah. And this is the point with the Romans. Everything is they have to be joined up thinking. And also, it's also one of the reasons why you do need those fleets in terms of in being, because if you consider that's your communication time, then the forces you have there, forces you actually have available, are far more important because A, they're going to raise the cost at which people actually feel they can actually do it. Because if there is a force there, then they think, well, we have to be able to match it, or at least overmatch it to be able to succeed. So that A means it's going to take them longer, and it's going to be more obvious they're building up the resources to do something. And it's going to be something you might hear about, especially if you have a fleet wandering around. But also, that means you have something there to react with. Not in a month's time, not in 6 months' time, but you have something there to react with in probably a couple of days' time. And that's a big difference. That's a big difference in terms of your security prospect. That's a big difference in terms of your ability to react and affect events when they're at the point at which you can affect them most easily with minimal effort and minimal cost. And that's the problem for the Emperor, I would say. It's more a case of, in my mind, those death by 1,000 cuts mostly come about because they keep having to make short-term decisions to save money, which costs them far more in the long term. And that's the thing, is making decisions because of short-term politics or costs that are going to cost you a lot more in the long term. To rebuild.
Happens all the time in history. Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Happens all the time in history. By the way, before we go, I forgot to answer the question directly about the number of rows on an oar. Right. I agree with you. I don't think there's any more than 3 banks of oars. Almost certainly, usually only 2. So the number, whether it's a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5, is actually the number of overall on that particular side of the ship, port or starboard, people rowing who are distributed amongst that 2 or 3 banks of oars. So a 5 could be 3 rows at the top and 2 at the bottom, or 2 at the bottom or 2 at the top, or 2 on 1, 2 on 1, and 1 on 1. Never more than 3. I think usually 2 banks.
Because it's just going to get too complicated. You're going to end up bashing into each other the whole time. Never going to get anywhere.
Being you're like a Japanese heavy cruiser in the Second World War. Beautiful looking, but very top heavy.
Yeah. All right, Simon. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. I'm chatting for a little over an hour, and as always, it's wonderful. And yeah, please do go look up his books. Please, they're very, very good. And it's a great place to start because the Roman naval history is not something which is covered enough, I think. It really isn't covered enough. I know. Thank you, Simon. And is there any book you specifically want to mention to people?
Vandal Heaven, and then coming out in the new year, I've got a Quiquereme in Scotland, and then I've got a big one, which is The African Emperor about Septimius Severus. And as always, Alex, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure speaking to somebody who's as passionate about naval history as I am.
Oh, it's always fun to have you. All right. Thank you very much, Ron.
Cheers, dude.
So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to keep on doing Two Historians, and again, please keep making suggestions and suggesting people you'd like to have me on Two Historians. I'm happy to chat with anyone, basically. I have to admit, the first series is probably, at the moment, the first group are probably going to be people who are my friends, because, well, they're easier to get on something which is not yet a proven quantity, because they're my friends, and so I can pay them back by going, I'll shout you lunch at some point in the future. And they usually go, yeah, we'll do it. Or in the case of Simon, yeah, Simon's just wonderful. He's just a good friend. He really is a really super guy, and I hope you enjoyed it. And there are tons of books by him, and this is the point at which I'd really like to find all my Roman naval history books, which I have, which are written by him, because I basically buy all his books that I get my hands on. And helpfully I can't see them because I've been moving everything around because plumbers have been going back and forth. Not sure actually if the one of them went past during the actual recording. So I put out a pile of books and now they've been moved and now I can't find them. But life happens. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you like the channel, please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow, and that's something which is useful. I want to reach 15,000 subscribers by Christmas to end a family bet. And if you'd like to support the channel, there is super chats, super thanks. There are memberships. They're always useful. There's Patreon where there's suggested topics, and we have a lot of videos on this channel. I try and put a lot of work into this channel because I love it, and it's how I get a lot of my research out there and how I fund my research. That is my entire approach. I do other things to pay the bills that allow me to eat and enjoy Iron Brew and all the other things I do. It's It's history dough, which I love, and it's thanks to you I'm able to do what I love. And for those who aren't quite sure if they're watching this for the first time, the iron brew I'm talking to is the Scottish soft drink. I do realise there are other drinks called iron brew, but the one I drink is orange, fizzy, and full of caffeine and sugar. I know it's bad for me, but I love it. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. Take care and hope you enjoyed the video.